Today's episode was recorded live at Emory University's IDEAS Fest on October 18th, 2025 in Covington, Georgia. You can watch the video versions of this and past conversations at our website, singforscience.org. Please be sure to check out our other episodes, including one from last year's taping at IDEAS Fest with Jermaine Dupree and an anthropologist on the rise of Atlanta culture in the 1990s and early aughts. Don't forget to click subscribe, and please rate the show on your favorite podcast platform.
I think that growing up in an iconic musical family, you kind of sit on the borderline of both having the personal family stories, but also your family has the mythology of America built into it. And many of us, in creating our own personal family stories, use these cultural canonical stories as templates, as guidelines. You sit on an interesting border of those two kinds of cultural stories and also your own very deep personal family stories.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. In the sky, Lord, in the sky.
Welcome to Sing for Science, the show where musicians and scientists talk about music and science. I'm your host, Matt White. Each week, we'll talk about a song by our guest artist and how it connects with our guest scientist's area of expertise. Today, we'll be speaking with American music icon and celebrated singer-songwriter Rosanne Cash. Across Rosanne's 4-decade career, she has earned 4 Grammy Awards, been inducted into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, and is considered one of the pioneering forces of the Americana genre. In her best-selling memoir, Composed, she observes that, quote, "At the heart of all real country music lies family," a sentiment that echoes through her work and her heritage as part of the Carter Cash musical lineage. Also joining us is Dr. Robyn Fivush, a leading psychologist at Emory University and one of the world's foremost experts on autobiographical memory and family storytelling. Dr. Fivush's groundbreaking Dinnertime study revealed that when families share stories not just about success but about challenges, children develop a stronger sense of identity and resilience. Her research shows how the stories we tell and how we tell them shape who we are. The title of today's episode on the podcast is Will the Circle Be Unbroken? Music, Memory, and the Stories That Hold Us Together. Emory University, please help me give a warm welcome to Rosanne Cash and Dr. Robyn Fivush. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start by reading this passage that inspired our topic, the passage from your memoir that I alluded to in the intro. You said, "At the heart of all real country music lies family, lies a devotion to exploring the bonds of blood ties, both in performance and in songwriting. Of course, there have been notable families in pop music, but the community of country music has always emphasized the family connection, reveling in it, and there seems to be both less rivalry among its members and less need for its children to break away on their own musical terms. Country and roots music treat family as a rich and fascinating source of material for songs." So when I read that, something kind of clicked for me, because I think I've always loved country music, but as a New Yorker, I never felt like I could truly connect with it in all the ways it might be available to someone. So when I read what you wrote, it occurred to me that perhaps country music, what kind of gives it its magic, is that maybe there is this kind of intimate family energy to it that makes it not entirely knowable to outsiders?
That's interesting. I would say that even beyond family, that country music, starting with, Appalachian ballads, those narrative ballads, that it went beyond family to the richest textures and experiences of life, death, travel, home, never getting back to home, because back when these songs were written, if you left home, chances were you would never see it again. Songs about mother, because chances are you would never see your mother again once you left home. I mean, there's a whole thing that Dust to Digital, they preserve recordings that would be lost. They did a whole double thing on mother, just songs about mother. And my dad told me there was a whole category about dead dogs. So it covers pretty much all the territory. So the point being that modern pop music is a lot about hookups and breakups. That's just the content and context of all of it. And country music covered a much wider territory.
And so this passage comes on the heels in your memoir when you're explaining the now famous part of American folklore, which is the list. You made this record. And so I don't know if I captured the right photo from the right era.
No, I think that was when I took my dad's car and got a ticket for going 155. So
That's that moment?
it looks like it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad I chose the wrong picture. Could you tell us about the list?
After high school, I went on the road with my dad, and we were on the tour bus one day, and he was playing guitar in the back of the bus, and I was listening, and I said, he played a song. I said, I don't know that song. And he looked alarmed, played another. I said, I don't know that song either. And he stopped, and he started making a list of songs. And he spent the next couple hours making this list. And he wrote across the top, 100 essential country songs. And he gave it to me, and he said, this is an education. And it was. It was indeed, it was not just an education in essential songs. It was an education in being American, because those songs are part of our American songbook, American library, cultural connections and consciousness. It was really deep. It opened up a world for me. As a Beatles fan, Elton John's fan, growing up in Southern California, the pop and rock of the 60s and 70s, it opened a whole world.
And it wasn't just country music. There was protest music on there, folk music, yeah.
Well, he had the mind of a musicologist, so it covered all of the feeder streams that went in and out of country music. The blues, Southern gospel, folk, protest songs, history songs.
I was able to dig up, there's an unreleased version that didn't make the full album of you and Nico Case singing Satisfied Mind.
Oh, yeah, God.
Man, that's gorgeous.
Gorgeous song. I don't know why that didn't make the record.
Yeah, I love that song so much.
Yeah.
So, Robyn, I'm going to assume this is rich territory for someone in your position.
Well, my position both as a researcher and also as a fan of country music. I think that one of the things that the list epitomizes is the way in which the older generation feels a need and is actually benefits from the passing on of the lessons that we've learned to our children, our grandchildren, our students, our family. In many ways, the list is almost like your family heirloom, right? It's like the passing down of an important piece of jewelry. But what's important about those heirlooms are the stories that go with it. And I think that particularly growing up in an iconic musical family, you kind of sit on the borderline of both having the personal stories, the personal family stories, but also your family has the mythology of America built into it. And many of us in creating our own personal family stories, use these cultural canonical stories as templates, as guidelines. You sit on an interesting border of those two kinds of cultural stories and also your own very deep personal family stories.
That's absolutely true. And beyond that, the songs themselves are used to communicate when we don't have the words ourselves. You know, there seems to be there's a song for when you're going away, there's a song for when you're coming home, there's a song for heartbreak and loss, there's a song for celebration. I mean, and that's what I learned from my dad too, is to seek out those songs that would help express what you feel and what you need when you couldn't say it yourself.
Very much so, and I think that for all of us, particularly when we're facing challenging events, it's often hard to find the words to put it into a coherent narrative. But we know that being able to put it into a coherent narrative is really good for us. It helps us put that event in its place to find some resolution, and individuals who are able to tell these more coherent narratives do better on a whole host of well-being measures, mental health measures. But that's what families help us do as well. It's like when we can't find the words ourselves, our family stories help us find those words. And sometimes the families can't tell the stories,
Right.
and we rely on the
Art.
larger media, art,
Yeah.
songs, novels, etc.
Well, it's also why I wrote a memoir, because I found that in the public sphere and in the press and in the tabloids that my own story was being co-opted, that there were things said about me and my life that were absolutely not true or misinterpreted or twisted in a way that made me look bad or made me look good, that wasn't actual fact. And I thought, well, if I don't write my own story, it will continue being co-opted. It will be co-opted anyway, but at least I've put my flag in the sand and said, this is what really happened in my life. And now I have to write another one because that was 2010 and lots happened since then.
You know, you raise that really interesting question. Who gets to tell the story?
Who gets to tell your story?
And who gets to tell your story, particularly when you're in the public eye, but even within a family, who gets to tell your story? So the way family stories revolve around the story of your birth or the story of, you know, something that obviously you can't remember your own birth, but your birth story becomes emblematic of who you are within your family, and you may not have any say in that. So what our research has shown is that families that are able to express their own perspective and are validated in that perspective, those kids are growing up much stronger and more resilient than in families where, no, this is the way it happened. This is the kind of person you are.
And also reclaiming the story from someone else's lens. You know, I always said, because I'm the oldest child, I had different parents than the youngest child in my family. So our stories, even though it may have been similar circumstances, are very different. There's a song in Hamilton about that, who tells your story.
How do you research families telling stories at a dinner table? I know
Very delicately.
Yeah.
To be quite frank, it's really descriptive observational work. We just go into families' homes that are willing to be, you know, recorded, and some of this work started when you actually had to give them a tape recorder. There were no iPhones. And just ask them to tape record dinner conversations and other kinds of conversations. Sometimes we would ask them, we would be in the room and say, tell me a story about a time that was really challenging for your family, or a time that was really great for your family, or a time that you discovered something new about your family. So sometimes we elicit particular kinds of stories, or we just tape record. And stories are the water we swim in. I mean, we don't see them because they're all around us all the time. In a typical dinner time conversation that lasts maybe 40 minutes, there's a story every 5 minutes. And not my work, but other work by other linguists and psychologists have shown that stories are about 40% of everyday conversation. We're constantly telling stories. If we go back to our conversation we just had, we told stories. They might have been little snippets, little bits and pieces, but those stories matter too. It's how you connect. It's how you make connections with other human beings. And it's how we understand who other human beings are.
How do you distinguish what is a story and what's something else? What's that other 60%?
Oh, it's things like they're building a new store on Main Street. Oh, it's going to be a Walmart. You know, so it's general description. There's also in families, there's a lot of discussion of subject matter from school. You know, so they discuss math problems or...
What you did at school today, does that constitute...
What you did at school today can become a story. I had lunch with Sheila and she got mad at me. Oh, why did she get mad at you? Well, I stole half her sandwich. You know, so it becomes a story, but the story has to be about your personal somebody's actions in the world. There has to be a protagonist. And maybe there has to be some tension. You know, some people argue that stories have to have some tension. It's not just, oh, I went to the store, but suddenly I went to the store. Tension.
I was just thinking, even tiny children, the stories they tell are windows to who they are. I was with my 3-year-old granddaughter yesterday, and I took her out alone. We were having a sandwich in a deli, and as we were leaving, she stopped at this table with these 2 young women, and she said, "Hi, I'm Evie, and I'm 3. I had a birthday, and Nana gave me some chocolate, and it was a present." And she just went on and on and on. I thought, wow, that's amazing.
Children start telling stories virtually as soon as they start to talk.
That's amazing.
And this brings up something fascinating I heard you say, because I heard you on Fresh Air with Terry Gross when you were, I guess probably when you just released the list. And she seemed to be pressing you about your spiritual beliefs, your spiritual background. And I think the way she framed it was she said most people, when they are faced with hardship, they either turn to faith or they turn to drugs and alcohol. And you said, well, I'm really neither person. But for me, if I were to have to reduce it to something, faith for me is art and music or the proclamations of young children.
It's so true.
Can you talk about that?
I have a friend who said to me once, he said, the best things in life have to do with young children, little children. And then I would say that and art, music, family, those things are the best things in life. It's so funny you bring up spirituality. So my aunt is in the last phase of her life, and she's 88. She's on full hospice now. She is the last member of that generation on both sides of my family. So once she goes, there's no wall between me and mortality. So it's very significant to me. And I went to see her on Thursday. And she started to tell a story about when Daddy had the wagon, the horse and wagon, and we went to town. I said, stop. And I got out my phone. I said, start again. And I videoed her telling it. And then she started telling all the stories from her youth, you know. Well, I was the manager of the basketball team, and, you know, the old church was there, and we got a car, and it was, you know, it's like the first time. I said, well, when did you get electricity? Oh, we never got electricity. No, she got electricity. When did you get running water? We never got running water. They never did when they lived on the farm.
Wow.
And I was thinking, my great-grandchildren will need to know those stories, to know who they are, in part, where they came from.
I think that's right, and I think the research bears that out. But we also need to make a distinction between what are living stories and stories that are now in the record. So it is important to know family history, and sometimes, unfortunately, the people who have told those stories are no longer with us, so the stories only live in whatever record is left. But there's something really meaningful about sitting down with somebody, You asked questions that brought out different aspects of the story. It created a different texture, a different relationship. And when kids hear those stories, as my colleague Marshall Duke, who does this research with me, says, from the lips, it makes a difference. It's a living story. Because suddenly here's this person sitting in front of you, and they're real, and that story is
It's
real.
real. It existed in
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. They're all important. All those kinds of family stories are important. But
I just realized the reason that I brought up my aunt is because when you said spirituality, because towards the end of the conversation, she said, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, "Yeah, but I'm not a big fan of religion, but I believe in God." She was like, she took this deep sigh. I said, "Were you worried about me?" And she said, "Oh, yes."
Oh, that's terrific. So with the dinner time study, the other component to it is that you're able to measure what makes for a resilient child. So these are longitudinal studies. How do you measure resilience of a child?
it's a great question, and it's a hard one to answer, and one that has a lot of different controversial answers in the research literature. But when we say resilient, what we're talking about are validated measures of things like self-esteem, how good do you feel about yourself, as well as, and I want to be very clear about this, we do measure the absence of bad stuff. So, how anxious are you? How, are you showing signs of depression or withdrawal or anxiety? So you want low on that. But we also are very interested in what's called flourishing. So positive stuff. I mean, good mental health is not just the absence of bad stuff. It's the presence of having a good, positive sense of your own self, a sense that you can make a difference in the world, a sense that your relationships are positive, that there are people who care about you, and that there's meaning and purpose to your life, and that's really hard to define. But what we find is that adolescents and young adults who know more of their family history, know more of these stories, and know these stories in ways that they take them in as part of who they are showing all, low on the bad stuff, high on the good stuff. So that's our measure of resilience.
And when you and I first met, you told me something that I did not know, because we were talking about the story of the list, because we'd both read Rosanne's memoir. And you'd dropped the phrase identity crisis, which to me always had this negative connotation to it. And I started looking into it, and you also explained to me who this is, Erik Erikson, and that crisis in medical terms just means transition. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're falling apart or anything like that. So how in his, I have right here a slide that shows this identity versus role confusion, because this is a true education for me, and probably most people think identity crisis, midlife crisis, and you think here's someone who is unhinged and unbalanced. However, it's just, these are phases of life that we all experience. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
I would love to.
Okay.
Erik Erikson is one of my heroes. Erik Erikson, he actually studied with Freud, but he argued that it was not all about sex, it was about social relationships and how important social relationships are. And he argued that development is a lifelong process. We're never finished. Well, hardly ever. I mean, at some point we're finished. And that we go through a series of what he called challenges or crises. And that's sort of when there's a particular challenge that's developmentally appropriate. So really, like for infants, it's the challenge of trust. Can I trust my caregivers? Can I trust that people will take care of me? Can I trust that I will be loved? And we kind of work through that challenge, hopefully for the good. We feel that we are loved and we can trust our caregivers. It doesn't mean we never face that challenge again. It just means that that's a foundation for the next series of challenges. Erikson became really famous for the identity crisis. So this is the challenge that adolescents and young adults face. We've all been there if you remember being an adolescent. There's that, suddenly both you're able to engage in a kind of thinking that you couldn't do before, so you can kind of take the perspective of others in really abstract and hypothetical ways. You can think more philosophically and abstractly about the world. And society is also demanding of you to start making some decisions for yourself. You know, okay, you're graduating high school. What are you going to do? Are you going to go to college? You're going to go on the road? You know, are you interested in having a romantic relationship? Are you going to continue to go to church with your family? And so the crisis of identity is a crisis of who am I? I love my parents, and this has worked well so far, but is this who I want to be as an adult? So there's a period of exploration. We try on different identities. It's why adolescents can be so difficult, why they can kind of do such crazy things. We kind of question everything. You know, do I want to do this? Do I want to obey authority? Do I want to go to school? Do I want to be in a romantic relationship? What are my beliefs? What are my values? Who do I want to be? And in the process of doing that, we create what's called a narrative identity. We take our experiences and we form them into a story of who we are. How did I become this person? And who am I going to be in the future? And that takes the form of a life story. In adolescence, we continually revisit our identity. It's not like once we resolve that challenge, one and done. We continually negotiate that identity. But that's the foundation for it. In midlife, and you talk about this in your book, when you transition to New York, the midlife crisis is similar to that crisis. It's a generativity crisis. It's okay, I've lived my life, and so far I've done great, and it's been wonderful, but is this all I want? Do I want something more? What am I leaving behind? As a parent, as a teacher, as an artist, as a banker, as an industrialist, what is my legacy? And how do I accomplish that? That's the midlife crisis. For some people, it can be very chaotic. For other people, this is great. Everything's going fabulously well, and they don't really make changes. At the end of life, we hit integrity versus despair. I've had a good life. It's been good. This is what your aunt is, this is why she's telling her stories now. It's important to her that she express, I lived a life of integrity. Yeah. I lived a life, it was a good life. And I had good values, and I want you to have that.
That's beautiful.
Rosanne has an exhibit up at the Country Music Hall of Fame. And as I understand it, this kind of central piece to it is a writing desk given to you by your father. Mm-hmm. And behind it is a placard describing this pivotal dream. Is that right?
Yeah. It's kind of exactly what you were talking about a midlife crisis. Is this what I want? Does my life have enough meaning? Am I really living my true potential? So I think I was making a record, or about to start making a record. And I had this dream. I loved Linda Ronstadt, and I knew Linda, and Linda had said this great thing. She said, you have to refine your skills to support your instincts. Like your instincts for what you wanted to do could be far greater than your skills. So you had to work on the skills to be able to reach those powerful, beautiful instincts. So I wrote that on my piece of paper, and I carried it around in my wallet. And I had this dream that I was at a party, and I walked in, and Linda was sitting there, and she was talking to this old man. And they seemed to be having this really interesting conversation. So I went and I sat down by Linda, and I tried to get into the conversation. And the old man turned to me very coldly, and he said, we don't respect dilettantes.
Oof. What a jerk.
No, I changed my life because of him. I have tremendous gratitude. I woke up literally shaking, and that dream changed my life. I said, I'm going to work really hard to be who I should be and do the best work I possibly can.
That's definitely a generativity challenge, and you were questioning. It's also what's often called a turning point.
It was.
That we encapsulate a particular specific challenge or event or instance in our life when we make a decision either to do something different or that we are on the right path, and we crystallize it into, and you very well may have had that dream, and that may have been exactly what your experience was, or it may have been, as you said, you were dealing with it for a while and then it crystallized in that moment. But we all experience these kinds of turning points in our life. When we look back and, how did you make the decision to record this album, or how did you make the decision to move to New York, or how did you make the decision to switch your record label, or
right.
And how did I make a decision to go to graduate school, or how did I make a decision to pursue the kind of research I pursue. We all have these stories that define for us how we made those decisions that resolve our challenges.
Do you ever find that you don't actually make the decision, but the course of your own history almost violently turns you in another direction?
Yeah, I definitely was saying it more proactively than it often is. Sometimes it is something happens that turns you. Sometimes it's something you want to pursue that turns you. It can be a whole lot of things. One of the things that we talked about was facing a very difficult illness.
Yeah.
And Arthur Franks talks a lot about these kinds of illness narratives. An illness that challenges your very sense of bodily integrity. And for many people, what they do is they create a narrative that's called a narrative of return. I just want it to be like it was. I just want to get better, and I want it to be like it was. And other people create what's called a quest narrative. This is a challenge to who I am, and it's an opportunity for me to explore more deeply who I am and what matters to me. Both of those lead to fairly healthy outcome. They're both okay paths, but they're kind of different paths that people take when they hit those kinds of really life-altering challenges.
That's interesting you say that usually the former, if I just wanted to go back to how it was, doesn't sound like that person's going to do as well.
It depends if they can go back to the way it was.
Yeah, right.
You can't always, and then it can become self-defeating.
Mm-hmm. So, and this is the Terry Gross interview that I was talking about. I think that she was referring to your brain surgery, and that's when she was asking you, when you face hardship, what were you driven to? Could you tell the audience a little bit about the experience of the brain surgery?
I had both feelings. I want it to go back how it was. I know it can't go back how it was. What am I going to do with that knowledge? So I was I'll just distill this down. I was having a lot of pain, a lot of headaches, and finally after 10 years, finally got diagnosed properly that I had a rare brain condition, and it was going to require brain surgery. So I had the surgery, and I thought, oh, well, I'll bounce back from this. And I booked my first concert like 3 months after the surgery. And not only did I have to cancel the entire tour, but just the flight there almost undid me, because I was still, it was a mess. And my neurosurgeon said to me, he said, I thought you were crazy to book that soon, but I didn't want to say anything. I said, why didn't you say something? Anyway, it took me much longer to recover, and I started to despair that I was going to be in pain the rest of my life, that I wouldn't be able to do as much as I had done, that I was aging rapidly from this. And
was it pain on top of the headaches was it a new pain, or was it just
yeah, it was global.
Oof.
It was just global. I couldn't get past it. So I did a lot of thinking in those 2 years, and I had a lot of images about what I wanted to do, how I wanted to change my life. And I did make use of that time, you know? It was like an outside violent force came in, but then the inside reflection helped me get right back to where I wanted to be. And thank God I did recover, you know, and I'm incredibly fortunate. I know people who had my condition who aren't doing that well. So,
What's the name of the condition?
Chiari malformation. It's basically my cerebellum was crushing my brainstem.
Doesn't sound good.
It wasn't fun.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
I do want to add just one thing, which is that sometimes that return narrative is what we need to cope. It's going to be fine. I'm going to be exactly who I was before. Sometimes we need that to cope. And we can only slowly let in. You said it took you 2 years. You can only slowly let in. It's like, no, this is really going to change my life in ways I didn't anticipate. And what do I do with that?
You know, but I think
So I don't think it's return or quest. I really think it
right,
can be.
and I needed those 2 years, right, to like process it and create some new visions for myself.
Is there much overlap between what we're talking about here with these different narratives and kind of the Joseph Campbell world, the world of
Oh,
myth?
I love
Yes.
Joseph
Yeah.
Campbell
Yes, exactly.
so much.
Yes, exactly.
You know, funny enough, I don't know if it was his alma mater or where he taught, but Sarah Lawrence in Bronxville, you know what they named after him on the campus? The gymnasium. The Joseph Campbell Gymnasium.
That's so weird.
Well, it's also weird that students at Sarah Lawrence use the gym, in my opinion. It's an artsy school, is my point.
I know Sarah Lawrence. Yeah. But even artsy people use the gym.
Well, present company included. Forget I said anything. So does that come up a lot?
Well, it goes back to kind of where we started with the Americana canonical story. I mean, Joseph Campbell talked about the mythic stories. And we have an American story. We have many, many American stories. But I'm just going to say, your father embodied one of the great American stories.
Oh, he had a hero's journey.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I was saying about you being on the border of knowing him as a very complicated human person and the mythic story of the man in black. And you had to navigate that in growing up with him as your father. But that mythic story, that's how most country music fans think of Johnny Cash, just in this mythic way.
It's dangerous. No, it really is dangerous because he was a very human person, and navigating that story was tremendously difficult for him. And then to also be a screen for people to project their own ideas onto him, right? This hero, this mythic journey you're talking about. And that kills some people. I mean, that kind of fame can kill people. So he was very gracious and strong in the way he navigated it.
I don't mean to say that it's a positive thing, but
it's hard.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the kind of the therapeutic applications of this? I realize you yourself are not a clinician, but I know that storytelling as therapy is one of the great interventions for people who suffer from severe trauma. And Rosanne, I discovered that you just worked with vets in Alaska.
Oh, yeah.
So I was hoping the both of you could talk about that overlap, your experience.
There's this program in, was it Anchorage or Fairbanks? I think it's Anchorage, where they take vets with PTSD and do songwriting workshops. So they asked me to do one with them. So I did a few sessions by Zoom, and then I went to Anchorage to be with them for a couple of days to complete the songs, help them complete the songs, and then they gave a performance for their families. It was one of the most moving things I've ever seen in my life. But one of the vets wrote this story about what he experienced that was so vivid and horrifying. And, he had a line about the blood in his boots, the blood that had gone into his boots, and the death and violence he had experienced. It was so powerful. And I thought, well, obviously that's his way to start to heal, is to just put it all out there without fear and just go, this is what happened, and I'm going to make it rhyme. The courage of that just blew me away. But, people like me, I do it on a lesser level. It's like, I feel this, I went through this is part of my history, I can imagine this, I'm going to make it rhyme.
Well, what we do know is that for everybody, being able to tell about your experiences in some kind of coherent way is really good for us. It is good for our positive mental health, for our flourishing, for our sense of meaning and purpose in life. For those of us who are unfortunate enough to experience some kind of traumatic event, often words fail us because you just can't make sense out of something senseless. And there's also, stories are told to, with, and through people. And there is often what's been called a conspiracy of silence around trauma, where people say, oh no, you don't have to talk about it, it's too hard. And what they mean is, frankly, I don't want to hear it. Because we need to talk about things that happen to us. So one of the great things about these kinds of programs, songwriting, there is also programs for writing stories. There are programs called Theater of War, where veterans write plays and put on plays. These are ways of giving people templates and outlets. They're kind of the narrative structures, because the song is a narrative, right? So it gives people the narrative structures to be able to say what they need to be able to say, and for people to be able to hear it. And that's healing.
How did you get involved with that organization?
They just asked me if I would do it with them. And these people are unseen. And they don't feel valued when they come back. They've gone through this, and they're just, they're not paid attention to, not nearly enough, not given credit enough. So it was a beautiful experience.
One thing that just jumped out at me was you were talking about, it was really heavy about putting this experience into rhyme. But I read something that you wrote about how your use of rhyme is kind of, I guess I interpret it as almost as your compass, with your songwriting.
Yeah.
Which is really fascinating to me as a songwriter myself, like finding the right rhyme to say something in a way that you can kind of stand behind, there's just something that's so, like poetry, being able to convey the ineffable that can't be put into prose, which is what songwriting is. I think it's just such a fascinating, rich territory. Which, and as Joni Mitchell said, like if you want to commit to a life of songwriting, you need to be fascinated by the process. I
am fascinated by the process. I'm fascinated by language. I'm fascinated by rhyme schemes. When my parents died really close together, my stepmom, then my dad, then my mom. And so I started writing songs in that period, and I started to feel really sorry for my sisters that they weren't songwriters, because it was helping me organize my grief in a way that didn't expurgate it, but organized it enough that I could process it better. And oddly, I started writing the first songs before anybody died.
Oh, wow. Like as a premonition, or because you were preparing yourself?
No, I think because creative work happens outside linear time. I do. I wrote the first song.
And you say you're not a spiritual person.
I don't know if that's spiritual or quantum physics. I think it's quantum physics. But I wrote the first song. It was called Black Cadillac, and it was about my dad's death. And when I finished the song, I went, oh no. Like, I knew it was a postcard from the future.
Did he sing on that song?
No, he had died. He died.
What was the song that he...
September When It Comes. But that was on another album.
Right.
But it was about...
His passing.
Yeah.
And he recognized it as such.
Yeah, he did.
Mm-hmm. I would like to turn to some questions from the audience here. There seems to be plenty of them. What would you add to the list and why?
Add to the list?
Yeah.
Oh, I have my own list.
Yeah.
You know, and there's cross-pollination, obviously. You know, my dad, he loved the Beatles. He actually did, but I think I would have Beatles songs on my list. And I'd have, you know, Joni Mitchell, and I'd have Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and I'd have Elton. I'd have a lot of people that he wouldn't have.
Which Joni Mitchell song?
Well, okay, so that's interesting because the album Blue is what made me realize that a woman could be a songwriter.
Yes.
Before that, I thought, oh, only men write songs. And then I heard Blue and I thought, oh, a woman can not only be a songwriter, she can kind of excavate her inner life and put it into poetic rhyme scheme and put it out for public consumption and have it be legitimate.
And mop the floor with all the male songwriters in her orbit. Yes. Okay. How have you distilled those family stories, conflicts, tensions, and crises of identity into art? Have you used other forms of artistic expression?
Yeah, I did visual art for a long time, and then I just started doing some visual art again. I went to France with a group of girlfriends and we did cyanotypes, which are, you know, sun chemically treated paper. You make your design and then the sun treats it. It was fantastic. What was the question about other kinds of art?
Well, how you distill family stories, conflicts, tensions, and the crises. And so crisis, I think, shares the same root with critical, I've read. So it's where crisis is referring to a transition.
I just wrote this song called Radio Memphis. I'm making a new album, and I was born in Memphis, and my dad's career started in Memphis. And, you know, I thought I was done with this subject matter, right? And then it comes up again. And at the end of the song, it said, "It's time to leave Radio Memphis."
That's the lyric?
Yeah. I don't know if I will, though.
Okay. In art and science, regarding storytelling, this is a question for you, Robyn. How do you reconcile the conflict between fact and fiction? Is autobiography ever truly possible?
Yes and no. So all memory is reconstructive. Memory is not a videotape. It is not an accurate representation of what happened. Everything, as we're experiencing it, we're already filtering it through a lens. And when we're remembering it, we're filtering it through the lens of that initial experience and all subsequent experiences. So we're always reconstructing our sense of what happened. And in fact, this is what you were just talking about. You reflected and you reinterpreted what this meant to you. That's what we do in autobiography. It's a natural occurring process. Does that mean that we are wrong about what happened? We're actually very accurate at the facts of what happened. What changes is how we put them together and think about them and interpret them. That doesn't mean people always agree about the facts, because what we take in is already being taken in through a lens. But the answer is kind of both and. You know, memory is both more accurate than you might think and less accurate than you might think.
And so this kind of leads to the next question, because I would imagine that a scientist's interpretation of dreams sort of shares that explanation. An audience member said, would you elaborate on why you felt the old man in the dream wouldn't tolerate dilettantes? And explore why the gentleman on stage felt that the old man was a jerk for saying this.
Well, you're going to have to answer that question.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I kind of operate on an adjusted scale of sensitivity. So if someone says to me something that feels even remotely critical, I'm going to think they're a jerk. Down the line, if I'm up here on the dais, I might think differently, and I could see how it probably led to something constructive in my life. But yes, that was my knee-jerk reaction. The guy was a jerk.
Well, he helped me. It
Yeah.
was brutal, but it was necessary, and it was helpful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We got one more question here. This is a broad one. Tell us about the interaction between spirituality and music. Spirituality being defined as pertaining to values, meaning, and connectivity. I'd be curious to hear both your takes on this.
I made a poster once that said, art is a more trustworthy expression of God than religion. Because I think that that warrants applause from at least two people. No, no. I have friends who are religious, and that's where they find their sustenance. But to me, art is without judgment. It's without market share, you know, and that it comes from a very pure sense of longing, and I find it to be a very trustworthy expression.
And it's getting back to this idea of being fascinated by the process so unknowable. And Joseph Campbell has that great definition of what God is, which is completely escaping me right now. But it's basically something that is a metaphor for something that cannot be explained. I encourage you to all look it up from a more reliable source than yours truly. But it's a really incredible definition that alludes to how unfathomable it all is and mysterious it is.
Yeah, the mystery is what
Yeah.
keeps me going.
Yeah. What might you have to add on? I mean, even as science.
So I'll say two things. One is, I think the idea that science and religion are incompatible is wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that science and religion and or spirituality, or whatever people mean by that, science is all about mystery and discovering things that are astounding and unexpected and inspiring awe. You mentioned quantum physics. If that's not spiritual, I don't know what is.
Right.
That's insane.
I so agree. Yeah. I am absolutely fascinated by quantum physics.
Yeah. And, you know, I guess I'm kind of like I go with what Einstein said. God doesn't play dice with the universe.
Do you know one more thing? The language in quantum physics is so poetic, you know? Dark matter, the event horizon, mutual entanglement. I mean, it's like, it's poetry. It just thrills me.
Singularity.
Singularity.
Yeah. It's interesting because
Black holes.
the stuff that some of these guys are talking about, these many worlds theories that are so much harder to wrap my head around than any miracle story I've read in a religious text, you know? Anyhow, we have a very, very special treat for all of you before we wrap up. Rosanne has graciously agreed to sing a song.
Well, Matt has graciously agreed to play.
You know, a piece about the origin story of this show that I don't usually share is that I guess around, it was probably 2016, I played a memorial concert for Pete Seeger that his goddaughter had put on, and it completely changed my life. And I want to share with all of you that Pete said that all of the world's problems could be solved if we just sang together. And I don't think he's wrong. And for those of you who are not clapping and don't buy that, there are any number of scientific studies that demonstrate the benefits of communal singing. upregulating immune systems, reduced anxiety. So that's all to say that you're going to find the lyrics to the chorus up here, and you will kick yourself if you don't take advantage of this therapeutic opportunity to sing with Rosanne Cash.
My friend John Stewart, who was a songwriting mentor to me, he said, we're all just radio signals trying to find each other's, just trying to tune into each other. That was not, then I paraphrased that. What he said was much more poetic.
I know, that did it for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you know this song, so you have to sing along with it. I'll sing this is one of those songs that country music about family, but it's also about death. There were a lot of Appalachian ballads about death. Standing by my window on one cold and cloudy day, when I saw that earth come rolling for to carry my mother away, will the circle be unbroken? By and by, Lord, by and by, there's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. Undertaker, 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 please drive slow. For this lady you are holding, Lord, I hate to see her go. Will the circle be unbroken? By and by, Lord, by and by, there's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. Play it now. Well, I followed close behind her, tried to hold up and be brave, but I could not hide my sorrow when they laid her in the grave. Will the circle be unbroken? By and by, Lord, by and by, there's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. Once more. Will the circle be unbroken? By and by, Lord, by and by, there's a better home awaiting in the sky, Lord, in the sky. In the sky, Lord, in the sky.
Rosanne Cash and Dr. Robyn Fivush, thank you so much. Stay up to date with all things Rosanne by visiting her website, rosannecash.com. To learn more about Robyn's research, please visit her website, robynfivush.com. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Our music is by Panoram. Social media manager and video editor is Bailey Constas. Location recording was provided by Atlanta Pro AV, and our digital producer is Keenan Cush. Special thanks to Instrumental Hymns and Worship, Love Nashville, Darren Wang, Ken Carter, Rachel Stone, Danny Kahn, and Kevin Harrell for making today's episode possible. If you like Sing for Science, the best way you can support us is to give us a review, tell a friend about the show, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. For more information, please visit singforscience.org and follow us on social media @SingForScience. Thanks for listening.